In your rambling, incoherent response, were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought?
And welcome to the Author Rand Show. We have lots of rational thoughts today, but I just love the opening because it's funny. Our guest today has got a great background and is a dynamic person, speaker, author, woman about town. And she's got some very interesting ideas we're going to share about culture and your bottom line. So stick around for that. She's a Boston bombing survivor. We're going to hear a little bit about that story and how it affected her life and how some hidden traumas are also affecting perhaps people in your company. So without further ado, welcome Miss Maya Chylinski. Maya, how are you?
Hey, Doug, I'm doing great, and I'm excited to be talking with you today.
Yeah. Our topic today is the hidden culture killers that people are unaware of and how we can help reveal them and deal with them to help our company's bottom line. But before we get into that, I want to hear about your background, a little bit about your history and whatnot, and talk about some of the things you've learned over your career. So give me a little bit of your background.
You know, I'll start with 11 and a half years ago. My story obviously starts before then. I'm a little older than that. But that is the start of the story that brings you and I together today. So I was at the finish line of the 2013 Boston Marathon when 2 bombs exploded at the finish line. I was across from the first bomb. I didn't know what had happened to me. I knew I wasn't physically injured. I watched the bomb across the street. I watched the smoke rise. I knew it was a bomb. I don't know how, but in my head, I thought they just ruined the Boston Marathon. And when I evacuated and, moved on from the day, I thought, great, I'm okay. I witnessed this horrible thing, but I'm okay because I don't have a scratch on me.
Mm-hmm.
And then realized that isn't true. I actually am not okay.
Right. And that's a thing that people probably don't understand. I want to talk about for a few minutes. So we'll get to how that relates to culture in a moment. But, witnessing something it's a different type of trauma. It's not the same as actually being injured, of course, but it's no less important. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about what happened to you after it was over. You thought you're okay, but over the course of, I guess, weeks or days, you realized that things weren't as they were before.
Actually, over the course of days. The very next day, I was just out of it. I was depressed. I was confused. And I actually was in a work meeting. I worked from home at that time and was on a Zoom call just like this. Yeah. And suddenly I smelled the bomb. And my body went into that protective mode. I froze again. I was trying to figure out how would I get out of this place? Where was the bomb? Where was the fire? And I missed everything that was being said in the meeting. I, didn't say anything like, stop everybody, I'm in trouble. Yeah. I just checked out and tried to figure out what was going on. And eventually, actually a couple hours later, came to realize that for no reason I can explain to anybody, I put on the exact same clothes that next day that I had been wearing at the bombing, and they were soaked with the odor of the smoke. And it took a while to realize that's what happened, and no idea why I wore the same clothes the next day.
Yeah, I mean, you were across the street. It wasn't like there was, blood splatters on there, but certainly had the odor of the explosion and whatnot, huh?
Yes. I've actually, since that day, I saw a video from inside the Boston Public Library, which was behind me. So the bleachers were in front of the library, and all of the windows and the doors. And the moment of the explosion, you see all of the windows kind of bow in from the blast wave. And when I saw that, I realized, okay, that went through me to get to those windows. And so that was the smoke and the blast wave and all of the things that just embedded themselves in my clothing and in my brain as I realized very quickly that I wasn't okay.
Right. Okay. And so what'd you do next when you realized, oh, there's something lingering here?
Well, 1 week after, so the following Monday, the city held a moment of silence for the individuals who were killed.
Yep.
And I turned on my TV and I watched the ceremony. And within half an hour of that ending, I was on the phone with my doctor's office asking to see somebody in the behavioral health department.
Yep.
Because I realized, oh, I can't focus. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm not taking care of myself. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
At that time, though, I still thought there's nothing wrong with me because I don't have any physical injuries.
Yep.
I didn't realize that I was injured too, just in a different way.
Yep. You know, I've talked to enough professionals to know that, you know, there's still a stigma. It's getting better, but there's always been a stigma about mental wellness because there's nothing visually you can say, oh, you know, oh, buck up, you know, talk yourself out of it, be positive, whatever these words we use to, because we think we can just change our attitude, our personality, or, you know, with cognitive, you know, ideas and thoughts when there's something perhaps so deep that it's out of your control.
Right. Right. Like if you broke your bone and it was sticking out of your arm, I wouldn't say just buck up, dude, you can fix it.
Right.
But we still do that for mental health wounds. And the challenge is that they're personally defined. So you don't know what's going on inside my head unless I tell you, or my behavior is so significant that you can see something. But it's often you have to trust what I'm telling you, that there's something going on. Or I don't want to tell you there's something going on, so I'm trying to hide it.
Yes.
So it's quite a conundrum.
Yeah. It's much more common, I think, on the hiding side, at least for guys, it is like, I'll take care of it. So when it comes to our topic here, you know, people with companies and culture and whatnot, you know, let's say you've got a company with, you know, 100, 500, 1,000 employees. They all have their own lives outside of work. They all have their own histories. Based on your, you know, research, you talk to plenty of people. What's going on culturally at a company with this variety, myriad of unseen, hidden things going on with a person's baggage? I'll use the word baggage intermittent with trauma because sometimes people don't think of it as a traumatic experience. It could just be childhood, something happened that's just lingering with them. So, you know,
right. Yeah. And often people refer to big T and little t trauma. So what happened to me would be a big T trauma. It's a thing that happens in your life.
Right.
You know, the Center for PTSD at the Veterans Administration says that roughly half of adults in the U.S. have undergone some significant trauma in their life. So if we just use that as a baseline, half of the people in your organization have something that they might be dealing with. That doesn't mean it's active in this moment. It doesn't mean they're still distressed by it. But we've all got these things.
I had a psychologist on the show last year, and there was a report that she had read, you know, like 5-6 years ago. There was 80% of people had trauma, including childhood, and then they updated it to 100%.
Yeah.
And I'm challenging, like, come on, 100%. And we started talking about my life. Like, come on, I have great family, childhood, whatnot. We're starting to talk a little bit. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, maybe there was a little bit here and there because we, especially if it's old, we tend to push it away, even though something's happened, maybe even epigenetically to our DNA, where it impacts who we are as an adult, you know. So go on. So yeah, 50 to 100%, whatever statistic you want to read. It's a lot.
Right. I look at a room of people and I assume it's 100%, but then I think, well, okay, perhaps there are a couple people here who are really lucky and have managed to get away.
Yeah.
But what that means is that, you know, we all bring these different experiences to our work life. We've all got these things going on, and some of them are active traumas. So some of us, I mentioned this phone call that I was on where I was checked out. I have no idea what was said on this call. I didn't tell anybody what was going on with me. So they all believed that I was listening and I was taking down the notes that I was supposed to be taking down the notes. So that kind of thing is happening in companies right now.
Right.
People are unable to focus. They are what it's called presenteeism. They're there, they're at their desk, they're looking like they're working, but they're not able to focus. And then the obvious absenteeism, I just don't even show up to work because I can't focus.
Yeah.
it, there are all sorts of numbers about the big impacts, the billions of dollars these kinds of things cost companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really wanting to get to the heart of, what does that mean for one company? What does that mean for you and your company? Like, these things impact the culture. They impact whether people feel safe.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't built a culture that understands that people go through difficult times and understands that there might be trauma in your workforce, then people might not feel safe. They might not trust you. They might not give you their all because they don't feel comfortable in the environment, or they don't feel seen. My own story is very much feeling invisible after the fact. And that is what led me on this whole path that ends up you and I talking today, of feeling like we're ignoring this whole piece of people's lives. But ignoring that has consequences. And if you're looking at an organizational culture, the consequences can be that lack of productivity, turnover. People just leave because they don't feel safe, but they're not going to tell you that's why they left the company. So
how do you work with a company in regards to that? Because if people are not going to be forthcoming with things, how do you help either bring it out of them or give them the tools to manage it so they can be more productive?
One of my favorite things to do is an analysis. Like, let's actually look at your company culture. And I have a framework, and I look at things like, what are your statistics of turnover, people taking paid time off, employee support groups, what kind of participation rate do you have on that? Have there been any mental health related short-term disability claims? So we kind of look at some of these markers that show people might not be feeling comfortable and safe and engaged. And then I do this analysis of what is actually happening in your culture and where are some areas where you might be able to improve. And to start with some things that are really simple. Culture change is hard. It takes a long time, and nobody wants to say, yes, 2 years from now, things are going to be great. So I want to look at some small changes companies can make right away to build that level of trust and start making those changes.
So you're doing this analysis, getting the awareness up. Obviously, there's some, objective data, but subjective data. How many people are you basically surveying in a company to find out, unpack their culture?
It depends on the company. I just recently was talking with a client who doesn't want to do a survey. They have done so many surveys and everybody is exhausted. And I said, great, we won't do a survey, but we are going to use their existing employee engagement surveys. We are going to interview a few people, so that's a limited data source, but I know that surveys can be problematic, especially if you've hired a lot of consultants who want to do their own surveys to find out what's going on. So I'm trying to get at it from existing data.
Okay. And I think, in terms of, being tired of data, and there's that, that removal of the humanity when you're just filling out a piece of paper, are people being truthful? Are the questions really good enough to get to the heart of the issue?
Right.
And that's why I say I'm guessing some subjective data, like actually having conversations, might give you a better overall, idea of what's going on there. I'm just assuming.
And I am working on something with another partner where we might be able to not do a survey per se, but have some questions where we can get at some really actionable data on the back end. So that's coming. But for now, what I'm using is, the existing tools that companies are already measuring. What are you already measuring? And let's look at that and see what that's saying.
Right. And I know you're, an exceptional researcher and writer and whatnot. You've analyzed some medium-sized companies with their culture and whatnot. I think I read one from Salesforce. You read it was really, really well done. What did you find out when you researched a company on their culture and mental wellness? Give me some of the stories you came up with on that.
One thing is, a lot of companies think they're doing it right. And I think that most of these companies are doing some things right. Like, they're not diluted and that they're not they're not doing a great job. So I think that the truth is that there are some companies who are getting some of this stuff right. The other thing that is really important to know is that programming and initiatives and benefits are all important, but they are not the solution. The culture still needs to be supportive and feel supportive to individuals. One thing I'm seeing is a disconnect between what management says about how wonderful things are or how things are going and what employees say,
Uh-huh.
especially when you look at some of those sites like Indeed and where employees can give feedback anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels there's definitely a disconnect sometimes between what management says and what the employees hear.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something I've been really interested in investigating. How do we figure out what that gap is and how to close that gap?
Right. And the management and the C-suite has to be very open to constructive feedback to this, of course.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
smiling because they're not always that way. So
They're not always. And some companies, I think, might never get there.
yeah.
Other companies and other leadership groups,
Mm-hmm.
I think if we can help them understand the real difference this change can make, they would be more open. I know if you're the CEO, especially if you're talking to a public company, you have to show change in the next 3 months. So I understand the pressures, and just hoping to find those levers to get them to understand this change might take longer than 3 months, but it's going to be worth it for the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. When you did your research on that one article, what was the most surprising thing you uncovered with, I think, Salesforce?
It was Salesforce. You know, I guess, I don't know if this is actually surprising, but I was impressed with the number of programs they have that are at their heart to address the humanness of the people who work with them. They're inclusive programs. They've got a pay equity program, both gender and across regions, to make sure that people doing the same jobs are being paid equitably. And these are all pieces that feed into the culture. If you work for a company that doesn't feel like you're being paid fairly, it doesn't matter what the CEO says about how great they are if you're feeling taken advantage of. So I was really impressed with the breadth and depth of the programs that they have in place to support their people.
Yeah, very good. What is the with the people you've talked to and the companies you've read about or written about, whatnot? What's the most I don't know, depressing, but somebody like they just didn't get it. And we're not going to mention names here, of course, but I'm thinking like, gosh, how could you not see that? Where they, I was talking to our friend, Dr. Phil Agros about that, right? He had a company that was doing really well, but they were like 60 days away from like imploding. And he did some other culture work there, and they did very well. They rebounded and probably going to be acquired. Have you seen anything where someone's like just imploded because of their culture?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A company that I was talking to, and the person I was talking to said, I love what you're doing. It's great. We 1,000,000% need it. And leadership is never going to go for it. They treat us like we are robots, and we are not allowed to have emotions. We're all of that. And it made me realize that there are still organizations out there that haven't even been educated about how important this is. Or maybe they've seen the same numbers and they don't care. I don't know. I can't figure out why they're doing this. But I was definitely surprised to find out there are companies who even the leaders think it's a good idea, but they know it won't be implemented.
I have a couple clients, and there's an old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it sounds fluffy, woo-woo type stuff, but gosh darn it, I have CEO, he's took his company from, 0 to 300 million in about a dozen years. And all he focuses on is culture. And he doesn't, the sales comes in, of course, but it comes in because of the culture. The foundational element there breeds excellence.
Right. Because the people that are working with this leader feel validated
Yeah.
and they feel supported and they feel like they could come ask for help if they needed help.
Right.
And that helps people. If you trust the organization, you trust the leaders, you want to do the work.
Right.
And it might even give you meaning to do the work. And those are the things that drive the bottom line.
Yeah. And I know you've got end of the year special here on some assessment stuff. You want to talk about that before we can have people contact you?
Yes, I am doing a couple of business analysis, analyzing your culture, and would love to have anybody who's interested in this. I'm doing a couple of them in return for testimonials and feedback. So I'm wanting to make sure that I'm doing what you need as a company. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out.
Okay. What size company would be a good fit for you for these? You have I think 2 or 3 complementary analysis left. So what would be an ideal client to help them out with?
I'd say 500 to 8 or 10,000 employees.
Okay.
And just someone who's open to figuring out, is it our culture that's causing some challenges and willing to make some changes?
So if you're running a company from 500 employees to 10,000 or so, and you'd like to be vulnerable and find out about your company's culture, Maya is willing to come in there and do a pretty deep analysis for you. No cost for the first, I think you have 2 or 3 spots for the rest of the year.
I do.
And you'll give them that information, data, whatnot, and recommendations, and they can either ignore it or take your advice and work with you or not. But I guess that's a really good thing to know, because people try to improve the culture without that baseline, have no clue where they are, right?
Right, exactly. I firmly believe you just need to understand where are we now? What is the baseline? And then you can figure out what changes you want to make.
Yeah, terrific. So how do people get a hold of you?
Best way is my website, which is mayachylinski.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me, Maya Chylinski. And I'd love to chat with any of you.
That's great. And if you didn't catch that, it's in the show notes below here, folks. You can just look below. Her LinkedIn profile and her website is right there. And I've known Maya for a while, and I strongly recommend you contact her. You will not be disappointed. You got nothing to lose, for God's sake. She's working for free for you for, how long does it take? Does it take like a week or so? Or how long does it take to do the assessment?
It takes a couple weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
And then depending on how long it takes to get the information from the company.
Right. Great. Okay. Great value. Thank you so much, Maya. Appreciate being on the show today. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Pleasure to talk with you.
You bet. All righty. That completes our show for today for the Author Brand Show. You're going to want to take notes. And if you didn't take notes, well, they're right below here in the show notes. So check those out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.